Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos. Boa tarde.
Hello, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the webinar about climate financing. It's an honor to be here with you. And I would like initially to introduce myself. I'm Matheus Couto, a program officer for the Center of Monitoring for International Cooperation of UNEP, the United Nations program for environmental program. Well, first of all, I would have some housekeeping here to this webinar. The attendees will have their microphones off all the time. Speakers will open when they speak. Feel free to interact in the Q&A tab, and also to select the language of your preference. We will have one talk in English and the others in Portuguese. You can choose your language of preference. Videos will be recorded and made available in YouTube, UNEP and OLACEFS YouTube channels. This is part of a project in strengthening the external control of environmental field, supported by the UNEP and the OLACEFS to support Brazilian TCU, the Court of Accounts of the Union of Brazil, and the other SAIs in Latin America to strengthen their task of having a better control in the environmental field. Our webinar today will have three parts. First part is an opening session where we have talks by UNEP, TCU, and GIZ. The second part of a presentation of contents will be made by Centro Brasil do Clima, EOS, and Fractal. This is a consortium that will be addressing the mapping and analysis of funding sources for climate action in Brazil. In the same topic, we have then a presentation by the US GAO, which is the institution, the SAI in the United States, that will also approach the topic of climate change for the audit institutions. And the third part is a Q&A session. So I invite you all to take part, sending your questions through the Q&A icon. We will have a team helping us selecting the questions and answers. Some of them will answer, we will write down in the very Q&A tab, and the others will be discussed after the presentations. So without much further ado, I would like to open our webinar, initially starting our opening panel with Mr. Gustavo Mañez, Coordinator of Climate Change in the UNEP for Latin America and the Caribbean. Mr. Mañez, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mateus. It's a pleasure to be here with you in the presentation of such an important study. As you know, the region of Latin America and the Caribbean in general is being the one that is most stricken by COVID-19. We have approximately 25 to 30% of the cases in the world, whereas we have just 5 to 6% of the world population. Obviously, the social impact, the economic impact of these pandemics has also producing a descent of more than 8% of the region's GDP. This in the situation of where climate changes are still going on. They do not stop due to pandemics. We saw last year and this year major losses in public infrastructure. We saw 2 hurricanes in Central America, separated with an interval of 2 weeks only, and also losses in agricultural productivity, wildfires, and so on and so forth. So the situation in the region and our dependence on commodities and raw materials and the export of these products, especially our dependence on fossil fuels and tourism, make us extremely vulnerable, not only to the climate changes themselves, but the costs of the climate change. So we think that this major vulnerability of the region, climate change, climate disasters, extreme events, lead to a higher economic and financial risk due to the climate changes. We've seen recent evaluation of Moody's and saying that the perception and the capacity of the region to take credit loans will be also compromised due to the climate crisis. So it is extremely important, and we have to integrate climate change in the macroeconomic policies, in public investment, public budgeting, in the in the safety practices. We see in the region some development in this sense, but we haven't been serious enough or systematic enough to integrate all that. This is a major priority on how to align national systems with the 1.5 degrees plus as per the Paris Agreement. And second, no amount of public investment for climate will be enough. We need a radical and fast transformation in the way we invest all of our resources, not only those destined to climate. So the greening of the financial systems is paramount and urgent, internationally and nationally, domestically. And here, this study also makes some recommendations. So for us, it's very important to work in a taxonomy of sustainable investments. We already started to work with other countries in the region. It will also be interesting to have a dialogue in this sense to define this taxonomy, and also how to have transparency in the investments, bank investments for climate change. There is already a very interesting debate in Brazilian Central Bank that goes in the direction we consider correct. So we have to thank all the work of our partners to give a vision of the state of the situation, and also the recommendations on how to develop a strategy for climate financing, for the implementation, and to reach the objective of 1.5 degrees Celsius as per the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gustavo, for your opening words. It's excellent to understand the regional context. Here in Latin America, we are exposed to climate risk, as everywhere in the world, but we have to do our homework, which is integrating climate actions in our accounting systems. So now I would like to invite, for this opening panel, Mr. Christian Lorjas, coordinator of cooperation of GIZ for the Amazon Fund. Christian, welcome, and you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mateus. Congratulations for pronouncing my name properly. It's not easy. Thank you, Gustavo, for your words. I'm Christian Lojas. I'm from GIZ, and I work in the Amazon Fund project together with our partner, BNDES, the Brazilian Development Fund, and our partners, especially Norway. I'm very happy to talk to you. It's a crucial topic for me. This is part of my work already for many years. I also would like to greet all the participants here, the speakers, the attendees and speakers and panelists, and the attendees for being interested in our topic, and thank the consortium to carry out this work, UNEP, TCU, and the USGAO. I think it is a very useful and important work. So, talking about the NDCs and Paris Agreement, of course, it makes sense for climate, and the study and other studies also prove that they make sense from the perspective of economy. But not all countries have the financial resources to start the implementation that is necessary to achieve the NDCs, the nationally determined contribution. And here we get into the point of international cooperation. GIZ is one arm of this international cooperation from Germany, that is the technical side, GIZ, and we are working with Brazil for many decades, diversity, climate, and many other areas. And we also invited the project for the project, the cooperation of TCU, the Brazilian Court of Accounts of the Union of Brazil, and the other OLACEFS, the SAIs of Latin America and the Caribbean. And I would like to address now the Amazon Fund, when our directory is an integral part. The fund, as you may know, it is a tool of financing with results for more than 1 decade, with a great success. I've been following up this project on behalf of KfW. I negotiated some projects. KfW is the economic arm of the German corporation. And what are the factors for success? In my opinion, governments with aligned objectives. This is a pre-requirement. You need a good partner, professional partner, solid partner, and above all, you need trust among parts. And without trust, nothing can be done. These tools and audit tools like due diligence, compliance tools, are tools that create trust, build trust, in addition to other more technical like profit chain. And if you work with funds and financing according to results, another very important instrument is the calculation of these results that must be transparent, robust, and up to date. So this is very important, and you can believe the donors require a lot of BNDES to be the eligible party to implement such a project. But the Amazon Fund was a subject of criticism with the current government, and audits even more. Our colleagues from TCU probably know they have to carry out these analyses and tests, and their BNDES proved that everything is in order, solid and well. And BNDES, the National Development Bank of Brazil, in itself is very transparent. You can access the Amazon Fund website, and all the bank cycle is there to see, to question, to challenge. I'm almost getting to the end of my talk with this example of the Amazon fund that was successful partially due to good auditing processes. And a little spoiler here, I would like to mention 2 points and limits for auditing. You probably know the case of Earhart in Germany. It failed. It's a complete fraud. And they had good results of audits. So it is never 100% credible, even with analysis and proof. And the second criticism, the fund suffered this strong analysis. And by asking for more information, you end up absorbing human resources and potential for implementation that only with an auditing can you stop the business for a while. So these are two very important points, but they are not 100%, and they should be balanced in the cost effectiveness of the tool.
Thank you, Christian. Excellent opening remarks, bringing an example of one of the funds and also the actions of the audit entities and the consequences of their work. So now I want to invite Mr. Hugo Schützels, Secretary of External Control of the Agriculture and the Environment within a Court of Audit for the Union, for the Brazilian unit. Thank you, Mateus. I want to thank our colleagues from the UNEP and also our colleagues from GZ, Christian, and all the technical team that has been helping us. Also, GAO, our colleagues that were so ready to share their experience with us. They are the American SAI, and also want to thank the colleagues that carried out the study in the consortium that today I think we have. But my special thanks also to this group, in fact, to this partnership that contribute to make this event come true. And finally, I want to thank everyone that supports us because you know how relevant this theme is. I am Hugo Schütz. Today I'm with my colleague Adriano Juras. We are two civil servants, auditors in our Court of Audit. We work in a secretariat of external control for agriculture and the environment. Today we have representatives of the Court of Audit and Comtema. The TCU is the Brazilian SAI, and Comtema is the OLACEFS Special Commission for the Environment, which is a commission that works together with our SAIs in Brazil. About the study and today's theme, climate change, we all know that they impact not only the economy, but also the society as a whole and the environment. It's a multidisciplinary global question that demand integrated responses. One of the mechanisms is exactly today's topic. It's exactly environmental climate fund, which is very challenging given the different arrangements that we see. As Christian said, one of the funds, the Amazon fund, is one of these elements, but there are a variety of actors, different types of governance and management, and an absence of a conceptual standardization on the subject. The SAIs, in English, SAIs, he's saying, Supreme Audit Institutions, they may play an important role in this topic. So by evaluating the financial resources, whether they are or not being invested in evaluation and mitigation policies, and if they are reaching the expected results, this is one of the roles that we play. So together with TCU and Comtema in Brazil, it's a pleasure to receive this webinar and also the study carried out by the UNEP. That is the initial starting point for a more global action in this topic. And quoting Mr. Gustavo's speech, the greening of our investments, we consider this urgent because we must quantify the assets in this area. Mateus, in a brief way, these are my initial remarks, and I see here a more formal partnership taking place between external control institutions playing their role in Brazil and abroad, and society as a whole, represented not only by UNEP, GIZ, and all the others that are contributing to this study that will be delivered through this initiative. So I thank you very much, and you know that on our side, we are fully available to work further on the results of this study. Qualified information today and in our near future is our most important asset, qualified information. So thank you, Mateus, and let's follow with the event. Thank you, Hugo. On behalf of the UNEP, I want to say that we are really happy with our cooperation between TCU, UNEP, with the support of GIZ. We are really happy with the results. Now, continuing with our agenda, I want to invite the consortium that carried out this study to map the climate fund in Brazil. Linda Murasawa and William Russell will represent the consortium Centro-Brasil Clima. Linda and William, you have 30 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. I am William Wills. I'm speaking on behalf of the consortium Centro-Brasil no Clima, Estratégia Sustentabilidade, and Fractal Consultants. First of all, I want to thank the financiers of the study, UNEP, GIZ, and all the participants. We are going to present subsidies for SAIs on the funding for climate actions. Thank you. I want to make a brief presentation of our goals and a little bit about the Paris Agreement. The next slide. The objective of the present study is to map out and analyze financing sources for mitigation of climate change, subsidize the action of the SAIs. The focus on this analysis is to present in an understandable way the ecosystem of mechanisms for climate finance in Brazil, especially about the operation of resources contributing to the work of the SAIs in the presenting also recommendations for the presentation of this result. So beginning with the Paris Agreement, it was signed in the COP. So among other things, and in summary, the need for a joint effort was established between the goal of 2 Celsius degrees in comparison to the pre-industrial period. We also agreed that the countries should present more ambitious goals to limit the warming within the agreed limits. Translating to Portuguese, in a turnstile mechanism in which you will turn only to one side, reducing more the emissions until we reach the agreed levels. Brazil presented its NDCs in COP21, and after ratification in 2016, it was transformed to the Brazilian NDC. In December 2020, Brazil presented its new NDC. Next slide, we are going to speak more about the first Brazilian NDC with more details. Thank you. So the goals that Brazil presented were a reduction by 2025 of 37% of our emissions as a comparison to 2025, and reduction of 42% in 2030, also having 2005 as a baseline. This is the official goal. This represented, based on the emissions of the second national inventory, not to surpass 1.3 or 1.2 billion tons until this corresponding dates. So within this NDC, we also presented an attachment with different measures among them. zero illegal deforestation until 2030, increase the participation of bioenergy in our energy matrix, increase the participation of renewable energy different than electricity, energy efficiency gains, an improvement of 5 million hectares in integration of different areas of cattle raising, agriculture, and a greater detailing. So how we can achieve this reduction until 2025 and 2030. In the new NDC presented in December of last year, the country ratified the goal of 2025 and confirmed the goal for 2030 as an official goal. Before, it was only a quantitative index. So this document improved the commitment with the specific goals. For example, the commitment to achieve zero legal forestation until 2025. It generated challenging it created questioning of the country's ability to reach this goal. And we had to correct the reductions for the goal for 2025. So in practice, 2030, we have 1.6 million tons of emissions and no longer 1.2. So an improve in 400 gigatons or 33%. So this represents an increase in the emissions in comparison to the previous goal that Brazil had introduced. And it was that Brazil stated that this was like a fixed goal, and in fact it was not fixed. So in April 2021, new goals were presented by the president. He returned to confirm zero illegal deforestation and carbon neutrality until 2050. We really hope this happens because it's really positive. Now going to the part of financing, different studies in Brazil carried out with this objective of estimating the costs and the impacts in the economy. What we have today, according to the COP studies and the Ministry of the Environment in Brazil, the need of funding until 2030 is between 260 billion reals. There's a lot of uncertainty in these scenarios. It's between 160 billion and 470 billion. So looking at the scenario of carbon neutrality until 2050, it will require a number of different actions in our society and a greater volume of resources. So it's essential for us to have all of this financing mechanism fine-tuned so we can inspect them and use them in the best way possible. Now I pass to Linda for the rest of the presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, William. Thank you all. I want to thank all of the participants and the sponsors of this event. So continuing with this presentation, the question of the discussion on climate financing is based on the discussions and the debates that were carried out in different forums. In the case of this definition of climate funding, according to on the UNFCCC, climate financing is a finance that can be local, national, or transnational, coming from different private or public sources, with a clear goal of reducing the emissions connected to greenhouse gases, according to the point of view of mitigation of vulnerabilities and improving adaptation, bringing resilience, both to human and ecological systems. The idea is that the resources come from different sources, so they can be multilateral funding from development banks, and we realize more and more that there are resources that are being raised and captured and earmarked for that goals. Within this UNFCCC mechanisms, we have what they call financing mechanisms, and it's important to highlight that there are two mechanisms. One is the Global Environmental Facility, known in Brazil as GEF, that was born in 1994 and was changed by the Kyoto Protocol and ratified in the Paris Agreement. And the GCF that was born in 2010 during the Cancun conference that has been also receiving more and more donations. Based on these tools that we already have and the mechanisms that are created, there are several financial instruments that were created to receive these resources. These financial instruments will support the projects in different ways. They can be formed by donations or grants, or they can come through concessional loans or loans connected to traditional existing mechanisms in each execution entity through the green bonuses. They can also come through guarantees and collaterals and debt conversion. So this is the initial concept of climate financing that was established. For us to check how this is being processed, we can see the ecosystem of climate finance. You have the contributing countries, the contributors that will work through bilateral agencies or implementation institutions, for example, GIZ or MURAD or UEFA, that work together with other multilateral institutions and together with financial mechanisms, the one that I just mentioned in terms of the GEF and the GCF, and others that are also financing mechanisms, but they are not formally linked to the UNFCCC. So you have multilateral institutions such as the World Bank, the IDB, and others, and also agents such as the UNDP, UNEP, FAO, and others that work to the sense of reaching the region or the country that was accredited within the concept of being a receiver, destination for these resources. How is this internalized in each country? How is this? Does this all start? The COPs are the places where these decisions are made, where these negotiations are held among countries. After the COP ends, there are other negotiations that continue, and these negotiations will continue, will define also the proceedings. In Brazil, it's up to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that lead the delegation during the COP sessions to decide, but they're not alone. They also bring different informations that were prepared according to the dialogue among different ministries and other entities, both from private or civil society entities, bringing different points of view that will be dealt with at the COP. This dialogue and these conversations that are held during these conferences, they serve as basis for agreements that can become local regulations, or they can also establish what guidelines will be used for the adherence to this agreement. So these principles and criteria established as these bilateral, multilateral negotiations are held. And these agreements, they must have governance, transparency, monitoring, audit, and several other types of informations that can clearly help us to determine where is this resource being used, how is it being used, where is it earmarked for, and to establish the efficiency of this process. In the implementation entities, the entities that receive these resources, these entities, they need to qualify these resources so they can be better managed. This qualification is sometimes recognized, what we call accredited entities, then they are recognized by the history of their work with this kind of process. In Brazil, for example, the BNDES, the Brazilian Bank of Economic and Social Development, is often appointed as an entity to receive this kind of resources. And the BNDES will then transform this into different instruments. It can be finance instruments or in collateral fund, or even in an insurance project earmarked for the types of projects connected to climate change. Here, an important point that we must highlight amongst different forms of financing. Why do we introduce the NDCs? Not only because they are connected to the funding in itself, but also because we want to understand the correlation of the use of these resources to meet the goals that William has just described. So if in the NDC it says that we should have more renewable energy in our energy matrix in the country, more than the hydropower plants, let's then confirm if climate financing is being earmarked to that goal. How much resources were then directed to that, and how much it resulted in terms of reduction of emissions. But we cannot forget that climate change is not only limited to those items that are recorded in the NDC. Oftentimes, you're going to have climate financing that is directed to other types of projects that are not connected to NDCs, but will also reduce emissions and are also bringing positive social environmental impacts.
What we notice in these studies is that by doing climate financing, it has a collaborative model with different expertises. We are talking here of different governments acting in bilateral, multilateral agreements involving also the understanding of international and domestic laws that are translated in different financial agents, national and international, that also can have to respect the national and international financial regulations, directing resources for different topics that have different sectoral regulations, environmental regulations, labor, social. And what we notice is that you start to have, for each negotiation, there will be a great diversity in the model of governance, different financial instruments, different criteria for risk evaluation, different projects, and consequently different indicators. This is what is involved in the whole ecosystem of climate financing. And this has been discussed for a while. And currently we have, in the discussion of the task force, together with the TSFD, they are already considering what the financing in general would be. And they bring the main elements of transparency, so that we can have at least a first framework to work with. So it brings this issue of the need for governance, strategies, how to work with risk management, and how to define metrics and goals, because from this concept, we start to verify the essence and effectiveness of the use of resources in such a way that those who are donating or sending resources not only have the transparency of the correct use and the strategy that is being used respond to what was negotiated in the different levels, in the different tiers, and also the issue of the risks. What we also observe within the studies is that the risk is currently something that have to be adapted, because there is the climate risk, when we say that the risk of the transition and the risk of a major catastrophic events, versus the financial risks, which are the traditional risks of credit analysis. What we created in terms of scenarios observing all of that was through these mechanisms. We carried out an analysis of BNDES environment mechanism, the FINEP, the National Fund on Climate Change, Amazon Fund, National Environment Fund, Environmental Compensation Fund, some mechanisms of IADB, CAF, GEF, and GCF. And we here listed the common points in their variety of projects, the different metrics presented by each project, in some case, innovative projects. What is this relevant, especially when we are talking about financing and the difficulties of the sector to approve a project? When we talk about innovation, so automatically it doesn't have a history because it is new. And a financial sector, usually financial industry, usually work with statistic basis to build risk. And if we don't have history, this is an unknown risk that can be a high risk. So this issue of risk and the need to have a transition of business models, it starts to require from climate financing a new outlook. You need an increase on a risk appetite. You need a new look for these new models. I'm sorry, we are talking in the mid to long run, not having quantitative but qualitative indicators. So this raises attention that the climate funding has to pass through. And more the need for capacity building, not only of those who are receiving the funds in the edge, that is the project itself, but also the agencies, the implementing entities, and the financial institutions that have to understand the change that is going on. As mentioned in the opening, the guidance that the BNDES is giving and what we are detecting for the need of this guidance, and also counterparty instruments. So it is necessary, or collaterals. So we need not only to work with pure financing, but also the complementarity that many of these funds bring, which can be a donation, capacity building, seed capital, so the project can be established. And climate finance is also understood as a main catalyst to finance the project as a whole, because it can provide an initial study, and as of this study, we establish the basis for a long-term project. And as the amount of resources, of course, is limited for each country, there is a high level of requirements such as safeguards that are imposed to receive the funds. So in transition, we have different business models that are going towards low carbon with new technologies. Monitoring tools have to be also improved to monitor quantitative and qualitative methodologies, and what would be the introduction of climate risks in addition to the traditional credit risks, because these will bring about new regulations as we are seeing. And so we use this image of the giraffe above the clouds. So we have to look above the clouds to see what the opportunities are and not be just tied to the risk and paralyzed due to that. So in the final considerations, we would say the climate finance is an ecosystem of multiple stakeholders with a major diversity of mechanisms, which brings difficulty even to trace and consolidate all the resources. There are different sectors and projects involved, so the diversity of regulations, laws, expertise, monitoring, standards is very complex. When we talk about diverse regulations, we have also to consider, especially in Brazil, we are talking about the federal regulation, state regulation, and municipal regulation that may achieve these projects, in addition to the international principles and criteria that have to be abided by, and this impact the risk models that are being currently used, and this risk management have to improve considering climate variables, and there's a difficulty improving the effectiveness of the results. So we can associate that all the resources that were directed to the country are responding and to the NDC and to the goals as a whole. Another topic here, climate financing as a requirement to calculate emissions. Not only not following just one methodology as established by the FCCC, the UNFCCC, but also using local methodologies, for instance, like in agriculture, the Embrapa, the Brazilian Agency for Agricultural Development and Research. But even with these methodologies, there is a great difficulty for those receiving resources and carrying out the projects themselves to get to a final calculation. So briefly, this is a whole overview of our project, considering the analysis made, and this is our team, and we are available for any questions or doubts. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Linda and William, for this presentation. It is an excellent approach and make use of this, seize this opportunity to invite people to access the UNEP website next week, where we'll make available the study, and you will be able to understand into depth each of the funds studied. So continuing now, I would like to pass the floor to Adriano Juras, that is a federal auditor in external control and the Secretary of Agriculture and Environment, that will invite the next speakers. Adriano, you have the floor. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Matheus. Well, this is a thrilling topic and very complex and exciting, and we are very happy to establish this UNEP partnership and with the support of GIZ, and I thank Linda and William and all the team that took part in this study. And now I will invite you to adjust again your select the channel where in the interpretation globe to choose your language of preference, because I will start speaking English now to welcome our colleagues from SAI in the US.
So welcome, Marissa and Joe. Let me first introduce you to the audience. Ms. Marissa Dondo is a senior analyst at the GAO's Natural Resources and Environment team. Ms. Dondo began her career at GAO in 2009, and her audit work focuses on environmental and energy policies, including climate finance and resilience, oil and gas, and renewable energy policies. She has also been involved in the INTOSAI WGEA Working Group on Environment Auditing since 2017. Ms. Dondo has a Master of Arts in International Relations from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and a bachelor's degree in Economics and International Area Studies from the University of California, Los Angeles. And Joe Thompson is an assistant director in GAO's Natural Resources and Environment team. He coordinates GAO's climate finance and air pollution work and has been at GAO for over 18 years. Joe has a BS in Environmental Policy from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and a Master of Public Affairs from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Most of Joe's free time is spent playing with his 20-month-old daughter, Audra, and changing her diapers. It's quite close. We're talking about climate change, but also diapers change could be in the topic. So if we were face-to-face, I would say the floor is yours, but we are online. And so I say the screen is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Adriano. And I will share my screen now. Hopefully this will work. Joe, I hope the diapers are compostable, you know? So hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for inviting us to speak and to participate in today's session. Joe and I are gonna talk a little bit about an ongoing project we have with the Working Group on Environmental Auditing, specifically looking at auditing climate finance. Ooh, can I not? Oh, there we go. Okay, catching up. So just quickly, for those that are not familiar with the Working Group on Environmental Auditing, it is part of the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, or INTOSAI. And INTOSAI provides international guidelines, methodologies, trainings, and really just kind of information sharing among its members. The Working Group on Environmental Auditing was formed in 1992 at the time of the Rio Earth Summit on Sustainable Development. And it began as a small working group with about 12 members, but has since grown to be the largest working group within INTOSAI, and it now has over 80 members. The project that we're going to talk about today on climate finance is part of the working group's 2020 to 2022 work plan. So it'll be finalized next year. And the work plan really focuses on one of INTOSAI's strategic priorities of having SAIs contribute to the follow-up and review of the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that in mind, the working group really focused this kind of 3-year work plan on the environmental SDGs and supporting the audit of their implementation among the member SAIs. Let's see, there we go. So today's session, I'll just give a quick kind of vision statement for our work package project on climate finance, some brief background on the elements of climate finance that are relevant to this project. And then Joe is going to provide an overview of some of the preliminary results of our project, which include the results of a SAI survey that we conducted of both of SAIs from both donor and recipient countries, in which we asked about their experiences auditing climate finance. He'll provide some potential indicators that can be used in audits or other evaluations of climate finance. And he'll wrap up with a series of case studies. The working group had our assembly meeting in January, and we had several of our colleagues from the SAI of Finland, the European Court of Auditors, and SAI in Mexico provide some audit case studies, and he'll just give a brief overview of their presentations. So in terms of our vision, the big sort of question here is, why is the focus here on climate finance? And the working group really saw climate finance as the main tool to help developing countries kind of reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prepare for inevitable changes to the climate. And our primary goal here is to kind of use the sharing of experiences among SAIs and to provide specific approaches that SAIs can use in auditing climate finance. And so to that end, our project, beyond just providing some examples of audits that have been done, is really looking to provide two types of tools. So the first is, and Joe will kind of cover those at a high level. The first are potential indicators or criteria that SAIs can use in their climate finance audits. And the second is a roadmap to kind of take the audits of individual programs or projects and design a series of audits that allow a country or an SAI to see the big picture of climate finance in their country, rather than just an individual project or type of project. So for background, and we've heard a bit about the Paris Agreement already today, so I'll keep it brief, but essentially it's the first kind of binding and universal agreement to kind of face the challenge of climate change. And under the Paris Agreement, developed countries agreed to jointly mobilize $100 billion annually of funding beyond what would have been provided otherwise. And we'll talk a little bit later about kind of how that gets kind of tricky when you're looking at auditing and trying to understand progress in an individual country. The Paris Agreement kind of provided a wide flexibility in terms of what counted as climate finance, or what can count as climate finance toward that $100 billion goal. And it kind of on purpose did not provide a specific definition of climate finance. So this slide just shows the Sustainable Development Goal Target 13A, which is the focus of our project. That is the target related to climate finance. And it's to implement the commitment that was undertaken by developed countries to the UN Convention on Climate Change. And the target has 5 components that are broken out onto this slide, and they're color-coded because each of these 5 components is something that could be evaluated by an SAI or the UN or any external party, kind of trying to get a sense of what progress is looking like towards this SDG. So the Green Climate Fund, as Linda mentioned, was established in 2010 by the UNFCCC, and the kind of goal of the Green Climate Fund was to support the efforts of developing countries in their efforts to kind of face the challenges of climate change. And for our purposes, it's one of the main tools that we have in terms of tracking climate finance on a global scale. And you can see here, this isn't quite today. The data here were from July of last year, so just shy of a year ago. I think 45 countries, 3 regions, and 1 city had pledged a total of just over $10 billion to the Green Climate Fund. Linda also mentioned that there are a variety of stakeholders. This is just a sample of some of the stakeholders that are involved in climate finance. Some stakeholders are mostly involved in the tracking of climate finance funding, projects, that kind of thing. So those are organizations like the Green Fiscal Policy Network or World Resources Institute. And some of the other stakeholders are more directly involved in the multilateral climate finance. So the development banks are an example of that. So this is my last slide, and it is a figure that Joe will revisit when he's talking about specific tools later, but it's just a simplified version of what we saw in the Brazilian context of the various ways that climate finance can flow from a donor to a recipient. So the finance flows can go multilaterally, so through the UN, through the Green Climate Fund or the World Bank or some other multilateral institution. And that makes tracking very tricky. Or it can happen bilaterally from one country directly to another in the form of loans, grants, or in-kind assistance. And again, we'll kind of dig deeper into this diagram a bit later. And so with that, I will turn it over to Joe and I will manage the slides.
All right. Thank you, Marissa. Sorry, I was focusing on responding to a couple chats there. Before we get off this slide, though, I just wanted to note a few things. You know, we at GAO are classically financial auditors, and, you know, we now do program evaluation work and some foresight work for our Congress and for the administration. You know, but at our root, we're financial auditors. And the first thing that we do when looking at any problem is try to figure out how we can scope the problem, to break it up into pieces in a way that we can study it. And what this financial flow diagram shows is a way of thinking about how SAIs can be useful in auditing the flows of money that go to the UN and to individual recipient countries to meet the goals that countries set to send money back and forth. And if SAIs can think about those different flows of money and auditing those different flows of money in sort of a structured way, it is possible to roll those individual audits up into something larger that talks about, you know, whether the contributions of a country to the UN goal can be validated. And that's really what we're talking about here in our project. And you know, some of the findings that I will get into in a moment head in that direction. So that's what we're trying to show a process by which you can, you know, improve the, you know, use us. We're tools as SAIs to be used to help make the world better. And one thing that we can do is actually contribute in this area. So anyways, I'll get off my soapbox to get back to the slides. So now I'm going to summarize some key findings from our survey of SAIs from donor countries. Fundamentally, auditing the SDGs is challenging because SDGs, and in particular SDG 13A, were not designed with audits in mind. So it's challenging for us as auditors to figure out how to really track these flows of money. Some common challenges include the following. As Marissa noted, and as the previous presentations noted, there's no agreed upon definition of climate finance, and that makes it difficult for us and other countries to measure progress towards climate finance goals established under the Paris Agreement and set as a target for SDG 13A. What we found is of the 14 SAIs from donor countries that responded to our survey, none reported that their government has a formal definition of climate finance. Specifically, 8 of the 14 had no definition at all, and the remaining had a general idea but nothing formalized. In addition, half of the SAIs from donor countries reported having no objectives associated with climate finance contributions. While many SAIs have conducted audits related to climate finance, most of these audits are of individual projects or programs rather than overall contributions or financial flows. Moving on to the next slide, please. All right, now we'll move on and summarize some of the key findings from our survey from recipients of climate finance. As you may recall from the earlier discussion, the Paris Agreement did not provide a formal definition of climate finance. Of the 24 SAIs from recipient countries, 1/3 reported that their country has a formal definition of climate finance. About 1/3 also reported that their country has objectives associated with climate finance. And almost all reported on projects or programs funded through climate finance. So while many SAIs have conducted audits related to climate finance, few audits link projects or programs to strategic planning efforts. So we haven't quite figured out yet how to roll up all these individual audits into something larger, but that's something that we can accomplish as SAIs, and that's something we're trying to provide a roadmap for in our study for the Working Group on Environmental Auditing. So moving on to the next slide, SDG target 13A has an indicator associated with it. It's problematic in some ways, which we'll get into right now. SAIs from both donor and recipient countries have the opportunity to contribute to the follow-up and review of SDGs, but we need certain tools to do so. First, we're going to take a look at this indicator. And basically it says that the amounts provided and mobilized in US dollars per year in relation to the $100 billion collective commitment through 2025 focuses solely on the $100 billion goal. We're looking at the amounts provided and mobilized towards the collective commitment. So it's $100 billion, you know, it's out there, but it's not clear what everybody's doing to meet that goal. And it's very hard to define, you know, progress towards that goal because we don't have a definition. You know, for SAIs, this indicator has limitations. First, it's classified as a tier 2 indicator. The important aspect of tier 2 indicators for auditors is that while there may be an internationally established methodology and standards, data are not regularly provided by countries. We already know that insufficient climate finance data is a challenge for auditors, and this classification supports that point. Second, as mentioned earlier, there's no agreed upon definition of climate finance. And while some countries have defined the term, many have not. Lastly, the SDG indicator measures a collective commitment rather than an individual one, but only a fraction of the SAIs we surveyed reported that their government had objectives associated with climate finance contributions. These factors make it difficult for us as auditors to measure progress towards climate finance goals and also for the countries themselves. So moving on to the next slide, Marissa. All right, so where does that leave us? You know, one of the goals of our project for the Working Group on Environmental Auditing is to provide alternative indicators that SAIs can use when auditing climate finance, as well as to identify the characteristics of useful indicators. This slide provides one example of GAO's criteria for good performance measures, which can be used in considering the strength of a specific indicator or criteria in designing an audit. So as GAO and as many of our SAI friends across the world have, I mean, we develop criteria to evaluate things. And there's a whole range of different criteria that we can bring to bear on the financial auditing world related to SDG 13A. So moving on to the next slide. Other potential indicators that an SAI could use are a country's national adaptation plan or the Rio markers developed for the OECD. And also if there's any you know, financial or, you know, contributions to the UN spelled out in the NDC process under the Paris Accord. We'll hear from, I will briefly describe some studies by other SAIs later in this session about how they have used alternative indicators as criteria in designing performance audits. SAIs also have a role in internal control and oversight of their country processes and programs. In particular, you know, it's our job to track flows of money within the country, but also flows to recipient countries through different mechanisms, including bilateral loans and grants and through multilateral channels, including flows to the UN from donors and from the UN to recipients, in compliance with resilience specifications for infrastructure funded through climate finance or any number of other roles. I mean, as SAIs, it's our job to track the money. And, you know, if we view it the right way, we can track the contributions to SDG 13A. Moving on to the next slide, please. All right, so now we're back to that graphic again. Let's talk about how an SAI might design a series of audits on climate finance. You know, again, as I already said, we can play a big role tracking and improving accountability of the flows of climate finance through bilateral and multilateral channels by auditing each flow of money or assistance. For example, in designing audits, SAIs can ask, does the financial flow make progress towards the country's goals? First off, you should ask if there are goals, but yes, does the financial flow make progress towards the goals? Is the flow real? Meaning, is it new and additional, or are we just relabeling things that already exist for other purposes? And this has been a problem in the United States in the past. Is there a goal to measure progress towards? This one is key because you can't measure progress if you don't have established goals. As an SAI, you could tackle this by auditing the smaller individual elements and then using the smaller parts to help inform the big picture on climate finance in your country. And that can be useful to the UN if all countries sort of roll things up in a similar way. This can help the UN validate whether countries are actually making progress towards their goals. So, you know, we could have a key role to play in this whole area as SAIs. So now we get to 3 examples. And again, I'm presenting other people's work, so please don't ask me too many detailed questions about this. I'm trying to channel what they told us a while back. So a brief overview of an audit from the National Audit Office of Finland. The objective of this audit, and it's still underway, is to examine whether the management system of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs provides adequate conditions for effective and efficient climate finance. And it focuses on the climate finance channels and financial flows and management systems, including bilateral and multilateral assistance, as well as investments that are part of the country's development policy. So you can see the audit questions on the slide, but basically I wanted to illustrate that Finland is starting to think about things in the terms that we just discussed. How can we, as auditors, help our countries understand, whether the flows of money are actually meeting the goals of the country that are contributing the money or the countries that are using the money. And auditors are beginning to look into this. So next slide, please. The next case study is from the European Court of Auditors, tracking of climate finance spending in the EU budget. And this is actually a completed audit, if anybody wants to take a look at it. It was completed at the beginning of 2020, and the ECA found that the European Commission committed to spending at least 20% of the 2014 to 2020 EU budget on climate action by integrating climate-related spending into all EU policies. Now, tracking climate spending allows the Commission to assess whether it is meeting its target. And to do so, the ECA used the OECD Rio markers as their audit criteria. And as you would probably guess, the audit noted that some of the European Commission's assumptions were not conservative enough, which means that the EC was at risk of overstating climate spending. What that functionally means is that, if you use certain definitions, you might overcount climate funding than if you used more conservative definitions that really more closely linked climate finance to specifically climate change related things. And again, this is a problem in the United States also, and one that we as GAO are trying to figure out. They also found that negative impacts on the climate were not accounted for, and the audit outlines some improvements that can be made with legislative proposals. So next slide, Marissa. All right. In the last case study, we will discuss work from the SAI in Mexico. They conducted a review of the 2018 public account, which is sort of their budget. And it includes 22 audits of programs that are part of the adaptation and mitigation portion of the budget. So they have a general law on climate change in Mexico, and they used that law as criteria, specifically that a climate change fund is created in order to attract and sort of channelize public, private, national, and international finance resources to support implementation of actions to confront climate change. So there's a requirement in Mexican law to actually track climate finance and their contributions to the UN. So the focus of these reviews was whether their budgeting process was performing well in tracking these funds. And they found that in 2018, the country did not have a comprehensive national policy on climate change with a focus on coordination and cooperation. And because the agencies did not have specific sort of instruments for tracking funding, it was very hard to get a total for climate change funding within the Mexican budget. Further, they found that audited entities operated independently were designed to address specific problems without considering broader climate change goals. Again, this is a similar problem to sort of budgeting processes in the United States. SAI Mexico also conducted 2 performance audits related specifically to the SDGs. And regarding SDG 13, they found that the Mexican government did not define indicators to verify its compliance, and found that establishing country-specific goals and metrics using a framework of the SDGs would allow auditors to sort of better track whether the funding was real and headed towards the goals of SDG 13A. Not a surprising finding. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you very much for hosting us, and we are available for questions, if you write them in English.
Thank you, Joseph and Marissa. It was a great presentation, especially for a non-auditor to better understand the role of Superior Audit Institutions. So it's very clarifying. Good to learn from the countries you've mentioned. So now I will return to Portuguese. Voltando a português, para aqueles que...
So going back to Portuguese, for those who wish to change the language, you can use the interpretation globe below. So now with our Q&A session, we had some questions about the availability of the presentations. So I want to tell you all that we are asking for the speakers, if they allow, we can make the presentations available in the UNEP, the same website where you can use to access this webinar. The first question to Linda and William that contributed to the study about the access to resources. We have some questions about subnational governments, entrepreneurs, so in lower scales, not at the federal level. Do you think that there is like a facilitation of the access to these funds? I can answer. During negotiations, usually when you bring resources from international donors, usually this is negotiated directly with the federal government.
The federal government can establish the rules to direct the resources within these negotiations, saying that they can open both for public as for private entities. So cities and states can also receive the resources depending on the type of program. We can say program because after it becomes a financing mechanism, they open programs for energy efficiency, for cleaner cities. So for instance, BNDES has currently a program that is urban mobility that can also be assessed by the cities. And this resource in the National Fund for Climate Change is there. So it depends a lot on the type, and local entities in some situation can also negotiate directly with the entities that are the owner of the resources.
Linda.
Thank you, Linda. There's another question for you. Is there any survey about the absolute volumes, absolute amounts and projects for climate change in Brazil in terms of multilateral agencies that are part of the convention or not, bilateral agencies? Well, there is no a summary framework with all the mechanisms in Brazil. But we can say that there are many entities working in Brazil and they are very active. We have the example, for instance, of the UNEP with GIZ, together with AIBD and AIDB, I'm sorry, and other agents that bring a lot of resources. The resources that flow the most, there was the Amazon Fund that come directly from countries such as Norway and Germany, that currently you have other mechanisms and you receive these resources through different agents. It's not closed, it's not restricted to GF or GFC. Thank you, Linda. There is a question now in English, so I will change my...
Marisa, you've presented that there is not a clear definition on climate finance. And do you see a role for the superior audit institutions to support the countries to have this definition, or do you see a movement from the private sector to have a climate finance definition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, Joe, you can jump in too. From my perspective, I think just being really clear about what is getting counted is really important. So we found, it's been a while since GAO has done an audit of climate finance in the US, but when we did, we found a lot of problems with like budget tracking and just trying to figure out what exactly was counted towards the commitment. And I think Joe mentioned in his part of the presentation, the idea that the commitment is really to provide funding above and beyond what would have been provided anyway. And so without being very clear about what's getting counted, I think there is a risk that you end up with some creative accounting mechanisms to get to an amount. But I don't know that I have an opinion on who should be responsible for the definition. I'll let Joe.
Well, yeah, so it's not clear that you really can ever develop a crystal clear definition of climate finance, or that you should, right? So there's a reason that it's very hard to pin down. It's because it's flexible, and and the UN goals were designed to sort of target national government contributions, nonprofit contributions, and private sector contributions towards that overall goal. And that's a good thing, right? If you became too specific, you would probably leave some of those out. But what we can do as auditors is be very transparent about what is actually counted, so everybody can understand whether the funds are truly new and additional. And that's what I think Marissa was getting at. So maybe less specific definition, more very transparent about what everybody's doing, and rolling it up in a way that might be consistent across other countries.
Thank you, Joseph and Marissa. Yes, I agree. And also discussing the study that we'll be launching next week, we found that transparency is a key issue, and so is governance. So thank you for the answer. Uma outra pergunta aqui.
Another question. I will go back to Portuguese. A question to Linda and William. How does environmental compliance could help the process of auditing to make it more clear the application of climate funds? This is an excellent point, because we have different laws, and there's a difficulty of monitoring some of the cases. So the help of the understanding of agents, of a perspective of agents, external agents, to have a better performance of the projects and effectiveness on the use and assignment of resources. Currently, there are many agents, and even within a cooperation, these funds are invite different stakeholders to discuss during the previous part how to do the financing, what are the legal bases, and what indicators might be followed for the compliance. So auditing would always be welcome to the different procedures. Mateus, I don't know if I answered. Thank you, Linda. Yes, you answered. There's another question in English here. I will switch into English now.
And Joseph, do you think developing a climate finance taxonomy would be the solution for the fragmentation mentioned in the answer, in the previous answer?
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a good approach. I'm not sure I want to be the one to do it. It seems pretty hard.
I think UNEP has been doing some work in the region of Latin America and Caribbean on taxonomy. I don't know if Gustavo is still with us, if you wanted to say a few words. Okay. Maybe Gustavo is not here at the moment. Okay, so choose another question. Thank you, Marisa and Joe. So I'll move back to Portuguese. Então, voltando a português.
So switching back to Portuguese. I see that many of the questions were actually answered in our Q&A tab, and I'll choose some. We know that speakers allowed to make their presentations available. Both presentations, both PPTs will be available in our website. A question again in English, so I switch back to English.
What kind of enforcement GAO recommendations have to the executive branch?
Marisa, you want to start, or okay? Well, the executive branch is not required to follow our recommendations, but like I said, with transparency, whenever we issue a report with a recommendation or with what we call a matter for congressional consideration, which is really a recommendation for Congress to pass a law, it's out there in the public, and we follow up on it basically forever. So if we make a recommendation, we will continually harass the agencies and the administration until they make progress on that recommendation. Often we'll be asked to testify about recommendations that are still outstanding. So it's incumbent upon us as GAO to follow up and to stay engaged and to make sure that a focus stays on the recommendations until the executive branch or Congress actually passes a law to make it happen. So there's not built-in enforcement.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. So I'll move back to Portuguese. Voltando ao português.
So moving back to Portuguese. A question to the consortium: if the existing mechanisms of finance, of climate financing, are enough to comply with Brazilian NDC, and if not, what are the mechanisms that can gain scale if introduced? In such case, Matheus, if we consider just what is earmarked as climate financing, wouldn't be enough. But projects, generally speaking, are projects structured in combination with different mechanisms. So you have the climate finance. I will get an example to be clear. Infrastructure project, you can have part being financed by the mechanism, the climate mechanism, and the rest use other structures like debentures or other credit line or finance mechanism. So to achieve the goals as for GHG emissions, it do not depend only on what is earmarked as climatic, but the set of models existing in the financial sector. Okay, thank you very much, Linda. Well, the questions we have, most of them were answered. We still have one open, Linda, but Joe just put a link for those who are interested to have more information about US GAO on climate change. And Linda, we still have an open question here. the Green Climate Fund approved 38 projects in Latin America and the Caribbean in 10 years. In the whole, it was 138 projects implemented around the world. Of those, 77 in the Asia Pacific. Brazil has just 4 projects under deployment, which proves that there is a major difference of access to climate financing. So is there any other interest behind that of making these investments of the Green Fund in Asia Pacific, or is there any other explanation for this concentration? Well, the GCF has an accreditation of local implementation agencies. In Brazil, we have 2 entities that are accredited, the BNDES, the Brazilian National Development Bank, and the other is the Federal Bank, Caixa Econômica Federal. This decreases the access, and the reason for not having that many people accredited is because the GCF has a high standard for both in risk management as for the safeguards that follow the standards of the World Bank. And in the scale we have in Brazil for the financing agents, not necessarily is it possible to internalize all the top types of safeguards required, because we are talking about the cost of implementation of all that, monitoring, operationalization, and so on and so forth. So one of the reasons for the GCF that they recognized and they work already on that is discussing with other entities that want to be accredited. Recently, some important projects were approved in Brazil by means of GCF. One of them is technology needs assessment that is implemented by UNEP, where there was a mapping of the technologies that should be implemented so we can perform the climate goals in Brazil. And the other is the avoidable deforestation that is being implemented by UNDP. So we're starting to have a momentum to receive more projects here in the region. Let's see if is there any further questions here. Well, we have some about how to access resources, diversification. I believe Linda already addressed that. Well, if there's no further questions, I believe we can start to wrap up our webinar. I would like to remind you once again that this webinar will be available on UNEP, UNDP, OLACEFS, and GIZ websites, so you can watch in the future. The report on the study will also be available in the UNEP, UNEP website, as well as the presentations used today. We have some links posted in the chat about the US GIO work and also the UNEP work. Oh, there's a question about the translation. YouTube websites will have the presentation in the three languages, Portuguese, English, and Spanish, in the channels. So with that, I would like to pass the floor to Secretary Hugo Schützen for final remarks on the project and the seminar and the webinar. Hugo, you have the floor. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on your hour zone, well, your time zone. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be part of this distinct team of public servants and civil society. We have very interesting talks today, especially the last presentations where we have William and Linda presentation. Thank you very much. And also the experience and challenges faced by our colleagues on US GAO, that is the United States SAI, where we see that transparency is something that is noteworthy, not only as auditors, but as society. The Brazilian EFS, the Court of Accounts of the Union of Brazil, has some work similar to the GAO. As Matteo said, we are here to present for those who know what is external control and in the climate theme, and also some people who do not know. So we thank very much the questions because it adds understanding to this topic that is of worldwide importance. I would like to align a little bit to what Joseph said, the work of GIZ and the alliance with external control. Because, Mateus, we are auditors, we are technicals, we are apolitical and particular. So we have to have a judgment that is unbiased. As in the beginning of our talk, unbiased information is the most important asset we have. So I would like to congratulate all of those involved in this project. This webinar and study contribute to the SAIs to perform their work of promoting efficiency, accountability, efficacy, and transparency of public administration, which contributes to the national development goals and international commitments that we assumed, as is the case of climate change. So by having so high quality experts as Lilian, Linda, and everybody here helps us to be sure that we are walking in the right path. And we continue to count with the experience and expertise of different stakeholders as we are having today here. And with the publishing of the study conducted by UNEP that will be published next week. As for climate financing, climate funding, and the current context of the pandemic, it's important to highlight that this is a very challenging topic, because in the moment we are suffering major economic and social impacts, it is and will be a challenge not to disregard climate and environmental issues. And I'm sure that the SAIs, and today we have two, Brazilian SAI and the United States SAI, they could perform their job and add value to this theme, considering that the public sector has a relevant role in the sustainable development. We, SAIs, we can contribute understanding the financing mechanisms, the mitigation and adapting actions towards climate change, and foster accountability and social control. We should, therefore, as auditors, work together with this control network. And this, and I can't fail to mention, climate change do not respect geopolitical borders. To the contrary, it reaches all in different ways. So it is not enough to audit. We should audit, and we should continue, as our United States friend said, we should audit and monitor and follow up. And partnership is the key word in this event. It brought us here, and surely will allow us to continue to face complex topics as the matter in hand. So thank you all that contribute to carry out this initiative, and I will declare our event closed. Mateus, thank you very much. Hugo, I also thank all of those that collaborated with this event and partnership. I would like to remember that this event is promoted by the United Nations Environmental Programme in the sphere of the a program of strengthening external control on climate change by means of GIZ, the German corporation, OLACEFS, with the support of GIZ and the Ministry for Cooperation. And with that, we conclude our webinar.